Hey there, welcome into the College Basketball Bracket Science YouTube channel and podcast network. I'm your host for today. Today we're going to be talking strictly national championship contenders. There's a few teams that you might think have a chance of getting to the national championship that I actually cut off the list. I kind of cut this down a little bit more than I was originally expecting, just because there's a few teams where there's just like, yeah, that's a little bit too much to overlook for a team. You know, they could be really good basketball teams, could be, you know, a 6 or 7 seed, maybe climb up to a 5 seed, but I don't see a world where they end up winning the national championship. You know, there's a lot of numbers that go into winning the national championship. There's a lot of luck involved. So we're going to talk about we're going to break it down in sort of tiers. We have 4 tiers. I've cut it down to, I don't know the exact number, but probably, you know, 20-ish teams that I believe have a chance. And some might be surprising to you. Some might be, you know, left off the list. So, we're going to go through every single one of these teams that's on this list, and we're going to talk about positives of why they're legit national champion contenders and negatives for, you know, something that could hold them back. Not saying it's going to hold them back, but the biggest question for that team coming into the season, and maybe even some negatives for the teams a little bit lower on the list than you might have originally anticipated. So we're going to dive into that. But first off, before diving into everything, and we're going to get, you know, deep into it, we've hit 1,000 subscribers. So thank you all very much. You guys don't understand how much this helps me out once we hit 1,000 subscribers. You might see a few more ads, and just know that those ads, not ads in the middle of the show. I mean, they might pop up. I don't know. You sign up for like a YouTube ad program or whatever, but it helps getting over that 1,000 number, because that's like a criteria for making more money off of this. So I couldn't do it without you guys. Just want to say thank you to all of you guys who have made this happen. I saw my guy Mikey Man left a comment that I clicked on, and then for some reason it wasn't popping up. So I wanted to give a quick shout out to him, saying congrats for 1,000 subscribers. I didn't even realize we had 1,000. So thanks to him, and thanks to everyone else for you know, the continued support over the years. It really does help me out. And if anyone has any, you know, I try and make this a big like community sort of thing. If anyone has any, you know, ideas of how to monetize it even better, I'm open, because I'm new to all of this. This started actually as like an internship project, and just kind of grew a lot faster and better than I expected it to be. And I love doing it. So thanks again to everyone. It means a ton. 1,000 subscribers. Hopefully our next, by the end of the season, let's get to like 1,500. That would be pretty cool. All right. Before we dive into the show as well, which leads with that, follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Bracket Science with 2 S's, and like and subscribe to the show. Hit the like button before you head out. Let's keep growing the channel. All right, let's, without further ado, let's dive into our list. This is going to be the list. So we have tier 1, the favorites. So I'll kind of just label them off right now. Purdue, Houston, Duke, UConn, Kentucky, and Florida. Favorites to win the national championship this upcoming year. And then a gap into tier 2 where I put no surprise if this team were to you know, win the NCAA tournament. I don't think it would really surprise anyone. However, they're not the favorites going into the season. St. John's, UCLA, Arkansas, Michigan, Louisville, Arizona, Texas Tech, and BYU. Yeah, so I believe there is a clear gap from 1 to 2. Maybe a little smaller gap from tier 2 to 3. I kept switching back and forth some of these teams, but I'm happy with what I landed on. Tier 3 could get there. You know, going into the season, they're not going to be that highly thought of. This is probably where Florida would have fit into the category of last season. They probably would have been in tier 3, climbed all the way up. Gonzaga, who just got great news on Ty and Grant Foster. Once again, we're going to talk about all of these teams, so we're just labeling them off right now. Iowa State, Kansas, Illinois, Alabama, and Tennessee. And then tier 4, there is a world. These are schools where I wouldn't predict it, but this is probably where UConn would have been in that first season that they won the national championship. What would that have been? 2023. San Diego State, Baylor, Missouri, Oregon, Wisconsin, Michigan State, Creighton, North Carolina State, North Carolina, and Auburn. So if you're a fan of some other schools that you think I might have missed, there's probably a reason why I left them off. A couple just real notable ones as I'm just going through the list over here at torvik.com. Ohio State, not on the list. USC, not on the list, but like those could be good teams. I don't see them as teams who could really, you know, pop off and win a national championship. Oklahoma, another one, even Texas in that conversation. So those are just schools where I don't, Ole Miss as well was the other one. So we're going to talk about these main schools right here. So we're going to start with the favorites and work all the way down. We're going to try and keep it brief to every school. We're just basically going to list what is their, why are they ranked so high? Why are they ranked a little lower than others? What is a positive and a negative going into the season for these teams? All right, let's start with Purdue. Number one team in the preseason AP poll, legit national championship contender. The positives, obviously bringing back Braden Smith, Fletcher Loyer, and Trey Kaufman-Renn. Braden Smith, the preseason player of the year. He's going to average, at worst, probably 8 assists a game this year, just dropping it off Trey Kaufman-Renn. Trey Kaufman-Renn looked a little bit rough in their scrimmage against Kentucky. Great win for Kentucky. Don't buy too much into the, the national championship, or the exhibition games. Take all of them with a grain of salt. Like I said, I like to watch individual players in those games, not necessarily, what the team's going to be. So, you can look into it a little bit, but take it with a grain of salt. The question for Purdue is going to be strictly on defense. So last season, they finished the season 53rd in defensive efficiency over at KenPom. And this season, it's going to be a continued concern. They didn't have any rim protection last year, one of the worst teams in all of Division I in rim protection last year. Now, a lot of that was because Daniel Jacobson got hurt, but Matt Painter has come out and said, it's my fault that I didn't have depth and be able to deal with an injury. So we went out and got Oscar Clough. So they now have 2 options. Both should be playing, the center role. Hopefully they stay healthy throughout the entire season. That's the big concern. Another, sort of concern is, the rim protection was a big thing, but they still, the big headline coming into the season is Braden Smith, Fletcher Loyer, Trey Kaufman-Renn, as it should be. However, that team wasn't that awesome last year. Matt Painter notably went on a podcast and said that, I believe it was against Auburn, where he was like, this was the first game I coached where they were just better than us. Like, we didn't have the talent. We weren't able to compete with them. Now, a lot of that should be helped through the rim protection. Like I said, they're my number one team going in. So I'm so in on Purdue, but I understand the concerns of people saying that. However, I do believe this is a year where if they don't make the Elite Eight, it's been a disappointing season. I would say the same thing with Houston, who we'll talk about next. They're preseason number one at KenPom and at Torvik and in most computer rankings that you'll find because, they're computer lovers as they always are. They should have the best defense in the entire country. Their positives coming in are they return Milos Uzan, they return Emmanuel Sharp, and they also return JoJo Tugler, who is my pick for the National Defensive Player of the Year. He is a beast. 7'6" wingspan, blocks everything. He looked the part at the end of the season last year once he really grew into, this Houston identity. My concern for Houston is strictly the offense. Last year was the best 3-point shooting team that Kelvin Sampson has had at Houston. They're losing, some 3-point threats. They're losing LJ Cryer, most notably, who was just a knockdown from everywhere kind of guy. Will the 3-point variance take a little bit of a step back here? Will Milos Uzan be able to step into that role? Emmanuel Sharp is back, who's a great shooter. So, it's not a complete worry. However, losing LJ Cryer, he was their go-to guy, and losing Juwan Roberts as well. He was kind of your go-to offensive guy on the block. So we'll see how they can replace that. It's going to rely a lot on the freshmen and Chris Senack and, Isaiah Harwell. And there's one I'm missing. Chris Senack, Isaiah Harwell, and who am I missing here? Kingston Flemings, excuse me. So it's going to rely a lot on the freshmen there to really just score. You have all the pieces around them. These are my top 2 teams going into the season. You're going to see that on just about every list, Purdue and Houston, going into the season, as I say. I do think that we'll keep talking here. Let's not go on it too much. Let's next move into Duke. So Duke, the positive is always going to be the talent going on there. And John Shire, I think, is going to learn a lot from what happened last year. Kind of reliance a lot on Cooper Flagg late in games. The late game heroics were not great for Duke. The late game coaching wasn't, spectacular, especially against Houston, where it just kind of all just fell out from under him. I know there were a couple missed free throws and stuff like that, but it's going to be Cam Boozer this year. My goodness, in those exhibition games, he was awesome. Like I said, take them all with a grain of salt, but watch individual players. 24 points, 23 rebounds. That is absolutely that's ridiculous. That's unbelievable. He looks like a grown man out there. So they're going to have the talent. Isaiah Evans, I believe, is going to take a huge jump. My question is point guard play for this team. Caleb Foster is going to be, probably in position to be the starting point guard. He couldn't really stay on the floor last year, quite frankly. Now they had, they ended up going to Tyrese Proctor, who was like 6'5", 6'6", playing the point guard. So they never really had a true point guard. Proctor was more of an off the ball guy, in the previous seasons. This year, Caleb Foster is going to have to step up if this team wants to be as elite as it can be. I think he will. I'm not, crazy about him, but they do also have Cam Boozer's brother, Caden Boozer, who could eventually step into that role. And then it's just a little bit of a youth issue. Like I'm not concerned as much with the youth of Houston because they have so many veteran pieces around them. There's not really any just true like veteran guys on this Duke team. Like Patrick Agamba, I think is going to be awesome this year. However, he hasn't played a ton of minutes. Same goes with Caleb Foster, hasn't played a ton of minutes. So we'll see. The depth is there. Duke's talented. They're a national championship threat. It's just how good can this this offense really be with just relying on Cam Boozer and with Isaiah Evans hopefully knocking down some shots. So very optimistic. Again, I'm nitpicking on these. Like these are minimal concerns, and if they get them figured out, they're going to be a 1 seed or in that conversation. All right, next up is UConn, who I have as a title favorite. And for those who have been following the show, they're my preseason pick to end up being the national champion. That's who, most of the money that I've placed is on, is UConn this upcoming season. I love the roster construction. That's the positive I have going into the season, along with Dan Hurley being the coach, and that coaching staff is just unbelievable. So the roster construction with Silas Demery Jr. coming in from Georgia, play that big Tristan Newton kind of role, just like Tristan Newton was the most outstanding player in the Final Four. Dan Hurley always does tremendous with big guards. Silas Demery is a big guard. And then filling out the starting lineup, Solo Ball. I said it on a previous show. Solo Ball's getting a lot of hype as like the preseason player of the year in the Big East. I don't think he's going to be the best player on their team. I think it's going to be Terrace Reed. Now, Terrace Reed is dealing with a little bit of injury right now. So this is going to be my one negative for this team is potential injury. We'll talk about it here in a second, but Terrace Reed is going to be awesome. For those who don't know, he is going to be a freak athlete down low. He's going to block shots. He's going to rebound. I'm hoping he can stay on the floor for 30 minutes a game and not get in foul trouble. And I think this is a dark horse threat to be a national player of the year. Second year development here. He was much better last year than at Michigan. I think he's going to be a dark horse player of the year. They still have Alex Karaban, and Alex Karaban is just a winner. No, last year was a little bit of a disappointment. And then Braylon Mullins. Braylon Mullins is also on the injury train right now. We're not quite sure when he's going to be back. It's, it's supposed to be like a little over a month. So that's going to be the big concern for this UConn team is the injury concern. Terrace Reed dealing with injuries. Braylon Mullen also dealing with injuries. Now, I think they have enough depth where they will be able to get it, figured out. I hope Terrace Reed is back for the start of the season. We should also mention Malachi Smith as the backup point guard for Silas Demery, who will transfers in from Dayton. Malachi Smith going to kind of play that Hassan Diarra role when he backed up Tristan Newton. I think this is, arguably just as good of a backcourt tandem there. So I think this team is in position to, really be a threat and be at the top of the sport again, as long as they can stay healthy. The other notable thing, the team wasn't that great last year. Now they really figured things out late in the season. They just weren't that great, but I did see them get better and better and better as the season went on. Obviously they competed with Florida for 40 minutes in that game. So I think UConn's going to be at the top of the chamber yet again. All right, next up, the Kentucky Wildcats. I know Kentucky fans are very, very optimistic about after that. Just they looked fantastic against Purdue in an exhibition game at Rupp. I said it on the last show. I'll say it again. Shout out to Kentucky. Shout out to Louisville. Shout out to who else was I shouting out? Oh, Tennessee had some notable ones. There's a bunch of other schools, but for having these games and selling out and making it feel like an actual like basketball game was pretty cool to see in the preseason, at least for college basketball nerds. So pretty cool stuff there. But Kentucky, they have the most expensive roster in the entire country, probably them or St. John's as the most collection of talent, probably Kentucky, because they have so many more players. I think offensively, they're going to be great. Mark Pope's a great offensive coach. He obviously went in the portal to get defense. Their defense could be like, they're a sneaky threat to like, probably after Houston, maybe Iowa State. And I'm not sure what, maybe Michigan should have a really good defense, but maybe like be top 5 in the country in defensive efficiency with Jaden Quaintance. People don't don't forget that just because Otega always awesome on offense, he is also awesome on defense. So I think this team is going to be great offensively, great defensively. I should also mention Muhammad Diabate on the defensive side. However, this is going to be a weird thing to kind of have a concern about, but it is a real thing. Do they have too many pieces? Are they going to have, too many players trying to get a lot of minutes? Are you really going to cut into Otega Owe's minutes? Are you like, what happens when Jaden Quaintance comes back? Does Brandon Garrison and I think Muhammad Diabate is going to play a ton, but do they really take a step back? How is this all going to fit? Because it is such an incredible collection of talent. Jasper Johnson looked awesome in the preseason exhibition. He's a freshman coming in. They just have so many pieces. Like Cam Williams might be like your fifth guard on the team. You have Jalen Lowe, Otega Owe, Jasper Johnson, Denzel Aberdeen, Malachi Moreno's there, who's, bigger, but Cam Williams is probably maybe your best shooter on this team. There's so many mouths to feed. I know it seems like a weird concern, but this is sometimes a thing. Look at how Alabama was last year. Now they were really good, but I don't think a lot of people were picking Alabama to win the national championship come March Madness time. And they did have some injuries. So if a team's ever built to deal with some injuries, it's Kentucky, but will there be too many mouths to feed? We will see. All right, sticking in the SEC, it is Florida as the next team. A team that, I started a little bit lower on, and I'm slowly climbing the ladder on. I think this team is, I never had a doubt that this team's going to be awesome, but some people are ranking them, I think they're third in the AP poll. I thought that was a little high, but I'm slowly starting to really get there on this team. So the strength, the positive is obviously the backcourt, is obviously the front court with bringing back Tommy Houck, Alex Condon, Ruben Chinyelu, and Micah Hamlockton from the national championship team last year. That is going to be your strength. They have the continuity there. The big concern is the backcourt. How will the backcourt adjust? Because think about how awesome this Florida team was last year. We mentioned those four guys. They also had Walter Clayton Jr., Elijah Martin, Will Richard, Denzel Aberdeen. That's an 8-man roster of just like terrific basketball players. This year, it's probably going to be Boogie Fland and Xavier Lee having to really carry the load. We'll see if A.J. Brown can get into, I wouldn't be shocked if A.J. Brown is your starting two at the end of the year. I don't know why I'm hesitant on Xavier Lee. I just am a little bit. He just looks thin. He's been good and is in the exhibition games. We'll see against like high-level talent. I can't wait to watch Kentucky and Florida play this upcoming season. So the backcourt is the big question. And just because Tommy Houck's going to be playing the three. He's a natural probably 4, he can down to the 3, but he's big. The team's going to be huge. The front court's going to be awesome. Will the backcourt be able to match what last year's backcourt is? It's going to be a completely revamped team. Last year, I know they have a lot of continuity, but last year, everything went through the backcourt with Walter Clayton, with Elijah Martin, with Will Richard, and with Denzel Aberdeen. This year, it's going to switch. They're going to run the offense through probably Alex Condon and through Tommy Houck. Going to be a fun team to watch. I am so intrigued to see how they start the season off with a game against Arizona. All right, let's move down to tier 2. St. John's next up. St. John's, like I said, with Kentucky, probably has maybe the most, just overall amount of talent on the roster. However, how does it fit? So last year, they were terrific defensively. Second best defense in the country behind Houston via Ken Pom. This year, they went out in the portal, and Rick Pitino is obviously a terrific basketball coach. He went out and got a bunch of offense. Brings in Ian Jackson via North Carolina. He didn't play a ton last year, but we see the talent there. He brings in Oziah Sellers from Stanford, a terrific shooter. Brings in Hosan Sanan from Arizona State. He brings in Dylan Darling from Idaho State from last season. So what does that mean? Who's going to play point guard? Dylan Darling's probably not your most, to me, he might be the most obvious choice, but he's probably going to come off the bench for just this overall amount of talent. It was noted that Ian Jackson was supposed to be the point guard. Rick Pitino came out and said he's the next great St. John's point guard. Now it's like they're 100% out on him playing point guard. It's supposedly going to be Oziah Sellers, and he's supposed to be like one of the better shooters in the entire country this upcoming season. So is he going to play point and not really rely on the shooting? They also brought in Bryce Hopkins from Providence, who is, a tremendous basketball player in his own right, but he's kind of a big man. And then Dylan Mitchell was the other transfer in from Cincinnati, who is a tremendous defender. but is a big man. So your defensive line is going to look like Zuby Ejiofor and Dylan Mitchell on the floor at some points. That is fantastic. You're not going to get much better than that. Bryce Hopkins, is he going to move down to the 3? And are you going to start Ian Jackson and Oziah Sellers? That's a huge lineup. But is there point guard play? Is there shooting when it comes to that? Bryce Hopkins can knock down threes, but he also makes a living down in the post as well. Hosan Sanan is a tremendous shooter, but he's not a point guard. Dylan Darling, like we said, might end up being the starting point guard midway through the season. They're not going to start with that. I think they're going to start with Oziah Sellers. I think their starting lineup will be Oziah Sellers, Ian Jackson, Bryce Hopkins, Zuby Ejiofor, and probably Hosan Sanan, with Dylan Mitchell coming off the bench. That's my prediction, but there's a lot of ways he can go with this. So like kind of Kentucky, there's a lot of mouths to feed. There's not a true point guard to feed all those mouths. So we'll see. I'm optimistic about what Rick Pitino can do with the squad, though. Next up, UCLA. So UCLA, the positives, a tremendous job in the transfer portal, bringing in Donovan Dent. Mick Cronin does so well when he has a stud point guard, and he's got a top 3 point guard in the entire country. I'm curious to see this. That's kind of an underrated storyline this upcoming season is Donovan Dent versus Braden Smith in the Big Ten. Maybe the 2 best point guards in the entire country. Braden Smith is the preseason, Wooden Award winner for the player of the year for a reason. Donovan Dent was the Mountain West player of the year last year. He is awesome as well. So a win there, bringing in Donovan Dent. Tyler Bilodeau is one of the more underrated players, not only in the Big Ten, but in the entire country. A tremendous scorer. Sky Clark looks good. Eric Daly, a good glue piece. However, the big concern for me is at the center position. It's going to be Xavier Booker probably starting there, the transfer from Michigan State, who he couldn't really get on the floor at Michigan State. Now, the Michigan State team was great last year, but Michigan State was playing Carson Cooper over Xavier Booker, who was a former 5-star recruit. Or it could be Steven Jamerson, who's a transfer from San Diego. As crazy as it sounds, just from watching college basketball, I would probably start Jamerson over Xavier Booker. I just don't like Xavier Booker being your main, rim defender. I think Jamerson has maybe a little bit of a better shot at playing down there. I wouldn't be surprised. He's a really hard worker. I wouldn't be surprised if he works himself into more minutes for Mick Cronin, who's a guy who loves hard work. So yeah, I'm a little concerned about the rim protection, but the rest of the team, really good roster construction, in my opinion. It's going to be Donovan Dent just being awesome. He's going to average a ton of assists this year. That's kind of my take. Dishing it off to Tyler Bilodeau, who's awesome. I think he's going to really make a name for himself because he flew under the radar last year. All right, next up is Arkansas. Arkansas, a team just like Florida, I'm continuing to climb up on. This team has all the pieces to if they didn't have a disappointing season last year, at least in the regular season, they obviously made the Sweet 16 and ended up having a pretty good year. If they went 11-7 in the SEC last year and then made the round of 32 and we're they had a pretty solid year 1 under Calipari and they bring all these pieces back. It was just a little bit of an odd year last year. I think this would be a top 7 team in the entire country. I think the, weirdness of last year is kind of underrating them a little bit. This team's roster looks awesome, in my opinion. Now, last year's roster was also very good, but I like this roster better, quite frankly. DJ Wagner is back, who I'm not super high on. Carter Knox is going to be awesome. Carter Knox is a dark horse, first team All-American. I think he's going to be terrific, as is Darius Acuff, who's the 5-star freshman coming in. I think he's the 4th best freshman in the country. I have him ahead of Nate Ament, have him ahead of a few other pieces, Koa Pete. I think Darius Acuff's going to be have a huge role here. Malik Thomas, another freshman who should have a big role. Nick Pringle's a really underrated basketball player. He was good at Alabama. He was good at South Carolina. I think he's going to be good for John Calipari as well. They need that manly presence down low. And, Ivicic wasn't going to give it to him last year. I think Nick Pringle is going to bring it to him this year. Trevon Brazile looked awesome with Carter Knox down the stretch last year. He looked like, the guy who was getting up on draft boards before he got hurt a couple years ago. And then Billy Richmond's going to be one of the better defenders in the entire country. That's a lot of pieces right there. I'm curious to see, my negative with this, I'm curious to see how much Calipari relies on DJ Wagner, because I think it's not even an unpopular opinion anymore that Jay Wagner, you know, if you were to give this team to 100, I don't want to speak for Arkansas fans, but just 100 college basketball media people. Now we don't know Arkansas as much as you do, but I'm curious how many people would put DJ Wagner in the starting lineup. I think some people are just kind of over him. Like, yeah, he just is what he is. You keep waiting for him to have that big, you know, comeback sort of season, but I think your best lineup is going with Darius Acuff, Carter Knox, Billy Richmond, Trevon Brazil, and whoever starts at center, whether that's Nick Pringle, Malik Ewan. I think that's your best lineup. Bring DJ Wagner off the bench, who can be a serviceable guy. I'm curious to see how much they rely on him because I just think he is what he is at this point. But this team has 8 players that I think could, realistically be really good players in the SEC. I think this team's going to be very underrated. I think they're going to get off. I mean, we saw what they did to Memphis in that exhibition game where it was like, whew, this team turns on the Jets. They are scary. All right, next up is Michigan. So I've become a little bit lower on Michigan. So like I've said, I'm growing on Arkansas and Florida, starting to cool off a little bit on Michigan. And it has nothing to do with what they've like done in exhibition play or anything. Like I said, I don't really adjust my rankings based on exhibition play. Yaxel Lendeborg's going to be great. He's going to be awesome. No doubt there. The front court's going to be awesome. Ade Mara and, Morez Johnson. Just, I'm cooling a little bit on the shooting. Namari Burnett and Roddy Gale are going to have to be the guys. I know some people are in on Roddy Gale. Some people are out on Roddy Gale. I happen to like Roddy Gale. I think I liked him a little too much where I might have overrated Michigan a little bit in the preseason, but it's going to come down to whether they can make shots. Elliot Cadeau is going to run the point. We know he can't shoot. I don't think he's going to develop a shot at this point. He might be serviceable and knock down 34% of threes on very limited, 3-point attempts. And I think that would be a success. However, is he going to be able to dish it? We know he's a great passer. Is he going to be able to dish it to Namari Burnett and Roddy Gale? And are they going to be able to make threes? That's my big concern. Not everything can run through Yaxel Lendeborg. I know Dusty May said that he's going to try and maybe even fool around with Yaxel Lendeborg, Morris Johnson, and Ade Mara as potential like all 3 playing at the same time. I don't know how that's going to work because then you can't have Elliot Cadeau as like your shooter on the floor. You would have to have maybe Roddy Gale running point. I think LJ Kaysen is also going to have a significant impact in the backcourt. We'll see how big of a jump he can make this year. In the front court, they do still have, Will Shedder is serviceable at knocking down shots, but it just seems like kind of limited options to me. But the roster is there. The talent's there. I think they're going to be great defensively. I have no doubt this team's going to be great defensively. Just how will they make shots? That's my big concern coming into the season. All right, next up, Louisville. Louisville has obviously, put together one of the better transfer portal classes of the entire country, maybe even the best. Things I'm not worried about, they're shooting. Their positives are they're going to be able to beat anyone at any time this upcoming season. Ryan Conwell, Isaac McNeely, Mikel Brown, Adrian Woolley, 4 of like the best shooters you'll find in college basketball. Javon Hadley is also back, who's just kind of that glue guy that I think Louisville needs. And then with Ali Khalifa down low, just dishing out passes, a tremendous passer, one of the best passing big men in the entire country, just dishing it out to these shooters. I think it's going to be great. Kayshawn Pryor is also back, but I did mention on the last podcast, like we saw it against Kansas. Now that's an exhibition game, but what happens if they go cold? They go cold for a game. Ryan Conwell got a lot of hype last year. It's like, this could be a sneaky All-American guy on a Xavier team that's supposed to overperform. He was good. He wasn't awesome. Like he's got a tendency to he's a great shooter, but he's got a tendency to have some cold streaks. Isaac McNeely is a tremendous shooter. However, he's used to playing in such a slow environment. How will he do with a sped up environment? Mikel Brown, I think he's going to be really good, but he's going to be a shooter. So 3-point variance. Adrian Woolley is kind of the guy I'm higher on than a lot of people. I think he's going to be like a really, really important piece for this season. And then it's just outside of that, I feel like they're a team that can, as crazy as it sounds, it raises their floor as good of a shooting team as they are, but it can also lower their floor at some points against big teams. Like if you're playing against a Houston who takes away the 3-point shot as well as they do, or a terrific coach like a St. John's or someone. So I'm not worried about Louisville against, in their non-conference, they're playing a tough non-conference schedule, but when they're playing, bye games, they might beat teams by 40 or 50 points. It's the other games where they have to play up to, a Houston, where I'm a little bit concerned about just how high this team's ceiling is. Like I said, which is weird to say because they can beat anyone with their 3-point variance, but is the 3-point variance going to be too much to overcome at one point in, around a 32 in a Sweet 16 game? So that's my big concern in terms of national championship contention. All right, next up is Arizona out of the Big 12, a team that I ended up underrating in my preseason rankings. So you'll find people in the media, we change our minds all the time. So the more we see stuff, the more we watch tape and stuff, minds change. Arizona, I think, is going to be terrific this upcoming season. I did it on our Hot Take podcast, our Hot Take show, that I think Arizona might get to number 1 in the AP poll at one point. That's my hot take. They play Florida on opening night, and they kind of get a home court advantage in Vegas. So if they can beat Florida in that opening game, get up to top 5 in the country. And then I believe they play 2 bye games and then a game against UCLA, where UCLA will probably be top 10. If they win that one, you might be looking at the number 1 team in the country, depending on what, Purdue and Houston do. So that was kind of my hot take going into the season. I love the roster construction. I think the roster construction is fantastic. That's going to be my big thing for this upcoming season. And also just Tommy Lloyd in general. Let's kind of talk about Arizona's season last year. They were 4-5 to start, and that wasn't they played a tough schedule, but it wasn't like a, gauntlet of a schedule. And they were 4-5. Like the team just wasn't very good for a while. We were like, yeah, this looks like a team who's not going to make the NCAA tournament. Tommy Lloyd turned that program around. Now, give credit to the players, give credit to Caleb Love, but most of the credit goes to Tommy Lloyd. He turned that around like crazy, got him to a 4 seed and to the Sweet 16 like that. If you'd have told me that in the beginning of the year, I'm like, that's crazy. This team just, quite frankly, doesn't look like they have it. So that's a credit to Tommy Lloyd. And with this upcoming season, I think their roster construction looks a little better. Jaden Bradley is one of the more underrated players in the entire country. And then they have the big recruits of Koa Pete and Braden Burries. Someone count the times that I'm going to mix up Braden Burries and Braylon Mullins this upcoming season, because Braden and Braylon are just going to throw me off all season long. But Koa Pete and Braden Burries, I'll talk about them here in a second. They also bring back Anthony Del Orso. They bring back Toby Owaka, and Krivas is back from injury. So what I love is this big man platoon with Krivas and Toby Owaka. I think this could be as good of a platoon front court in the entire country, as just 2 pieces, not including, I know Michigan's going to be there with Mara and Morez Johnson. Obviously, Florida has a million options up there, but this is going to be really good at that 5 spot. They're 2 completely different players. Toby Owaka built a linebacker. I believe he's 6'8", rebounds the crap out of the ball, and Krivas is a rim protector at 7'2". However, the scoring they're going to have to get a lot out of Braden Burries or Koa Pete. I think just one of them, because I think Jaden Bradley is going to be really good offensively. And Anthony Del Orso is going to knock down shots on the perimeter. I think you need, if 2 of them are great, that team's really scary, but it is putting a lot of reliance on 2 freshmen. That's kind of a theme for this upcoming season. Teams with 2 freshmen, like we talked about Houston, Duke's got more than a few, but it's going to be a theme that we're going to have to rely on these freshmen. So how good will they be? That's my big concern for Arizona this upcoming season. All right, next up is Texas Tech. Texas Tech, I guess, probably like, what are we, 14 teams in, 10 teams into this? I should probably mention these are in no particular order. These are just, I randomly just put them in tiers. So no particular order. Texas Tech was a team I thought of putting in that first tier. A team that I've been higher on than most for, most of the time so far. Just something about Grant McCasland. Just, it's not even a shock to say that he's like a future star. Like he already is a star, but like, I think he's going to win a national championship at Texas Tech, or if he, decides to go somewhere else. They're 28th at Torvik in the preseason rankings, and I'm trying to find them here at KenPom. They're 12th at KenPom, so a little bit better of a feeling there. Grant McCasland has beaten his preseason KenPom rank, I believe, 8 or 9 years in a row. That is ridiculous. Like he's 12th at KenPom right now, so he's going to have to finish better than 12th at Ken Pom, which is just unbelievable, the streak he's on. He is a tremendous basketball coach. JT Toppin is as good or just a little below Braden Smith coming into the season. I'm seeing like a big gap. They're like, yeah, it's Braden Smith and maybe Darren Peterson, AJ DeBanza, Cam Boozer, and then probably JT Toppin rounding out the five. I think JT Toppin's right there as a legit threat for the National Player of the Year. They're going to have to get a huge jump from Christian Anderson, which everything I've heard and everything I've watched with the, U19 game or U18 game, whatever he was in, he was awesome. He's going to be terrific. They lose Darian Williams. I wish Darian Williams would have stayed, because if Darian Williams stays and you bring back Christian Anderson, JT Toppin, and Darian Williams, I'm betting this team to win the national championship. That's how high I was on them last year. I was high on them going into the season last year. They were unranked in the preseason AP poll. That was like my biggest miss for the AP poll voters going into last season. And yeah, the AP poll voters were wrong. This team was awesome. But they lose Darian Williams. Lawan Watts transfers in from Washington State. Kind of a similar player to Darian Williams. Not as good as Darian Williams, but similar. Can be serviceable. Donovan Atwell is also there. Josiah Mosley, and then Luke Bamgoy is supposed to kind of man the paint there with JT Toppin. So JT Toppin is so good down low that he has shooters around him, and they also have Lawan Watts, who can play some booty ball a little bit, kicking it out to some shooters. I love the construction of this roster. I think this team's going to be much better than people think coming into this season. My one concern is maybe just overall talent of the roster. This is all just kind of thinking that it's really going to fit for, Grant McCaslin. McCaslin's going to figure it out with this roster. Sometimes the most talented rosters don't win the national championship. Duke was the most talented roster in the country last year. They didn't win. So Texas Tech, I think, is going to have to elevate up, and I think they can do it under McCaslin. I think this is going to be a really underrated and really fun team to watch this upcoming season. All right, next up is BYU. BYU under Kevin Young in the second year here. The thing you got to be optimistic about if you're a BYU fan is obviously the talent. This team is as talented as, just about anyone in the country. So they're going to be in the same boat as I'm putting Kentucky. However, I'm a little bit higher on Kentucky than BYU. You bring in, obviously, AJ DeBanza. Richie Saunders is back. Keba Keita's back. Dawson Baker's back. And then you also bring in Rob Wright. And so it's a lot of mouths to feed, especially with the big three. Where's the scoring going to come from? It's going to come from DeBanza, Saunders, and Rob Wright. I mentioned that on a previous show that the team really turned around last year and became like a, top 10 team towards the end of the season, ended up making the Sweet 16. Once they really started running the ball through Richie Saunders and let him just kind of, just be the guy. So are they going to take that away this year with DeBanza, with Rob Wright? We'll see. Rob Wright is so fast. So if he can be, is Richie Saunders going to step back into just, more of a shooting role? He's a tremendous shooter, but that's my only concern for this roster. It's obviously incredibly talented. We'll see what the depth can be. But yeah, you got 6 or 7, legitimate like studs on this team. So definitely optimistic for BYU this upcoming season. All right, now we'll move on to tier 3, the could get there tier. Wouldn't be surprised at all. We'll go through these a little bit quicker. I know we're running a little bit deep here. Starting with Gonzaga. Gonzaga just got great news that Tyon Grant-Foster will be able to play. A win for, Gonzaga, and just kind of like, yeah, it should have happened. This common sense to me. He had cardiac arrest. He's been through a lot. He hasn't played that many Division I basketball games. Get him the, some eligibility, and he will be there. I wouldn't be surprised if Gonzaga, like just last year, at one point last season, I had them ranked number 1 in my rankings, which wasn't crazy at the time. Might seem crazy now. That was when they beat Baylor on opening night by like 30. And you're like, oh my God, here comes Gonzaga again. Then they kind of cooled off a little bit. They still finished top 10 in the season at Ken Pom. I like the roster better this season than I did last season. Now, I know that's crazy with losing Caliph Battle. I should say this. I like the roster construction. I like the continuity a little better this year than I did last year with Caliph Battle, and, Ryan Nemhard was there. It's a good team. I think this year could be a great team. Graham Ike is still there, as is Braden Huff in the backcourt. We mentioned Tyon Grant-Foster. Adam Miller is going to have to be, a go-to scorer this upcoming season. Was at Arizona State, previously at Illinois as well. He's going to have to be a go-to scorer. Also in the backcourt, Steele Venters is another option as a terrific scorer. He's been hurt the past 2 seasons, but he was a tremendous scorer the years before that at Eastern Washington. So what will he be? And then also Jalen Worley is a tremendous defender. He was part of the whole Virginia thing last year with when Tony Bennett left. Anyways, he'll be there, as a good defender. We'll see what he can do on the offensive side. And then Braden Smith, not Braden Smith from Purdue, Braden Smith, Braeden, sat out last year as a redshirt season behind Ryan Nemhard to just basically watch and learn. He was a previous player of the year at Colgate. I like that he sat out a year, and I think it's going to transfer over well after just practicing with Ryan Nemhard, watching him. I think he's going to be very, very justifiably good in the WCC this year. My concern, as crazy as it sounds, is are these players as good as we think they are? Is Graham Ike as good as we think he is? He's good. However, they were a 5 seed. They made the Sweet 16 2 years ago and an 8 seed last year as being, the go-to guy around a talented roster. Braden Huff, same situation. Adam Miller was playing for Bobby Hurley last year. That is, not my favorite the past 2 seasons, and was also at LSU before, so not really a bunch of winning there. Jalen Worley was at FSU at Florida State, and like we mentioned, transferred to Virginia, but ended up sitting out the season. And then Steel Venters doesn't have a lot of experience just because he's been hurt. So that's my big concern, is just how are these players as good as we think they are? It looks good on paper, but will it, transfer over to the games? That's the big question for me. All right, next up is Iowa State. Iowa State is, done unbelievable things under TJ Otzelberger. Tamin Lipsey is hurt right now. Hopefully he'll be back for night 1. I haven't seen the big, I haven't seen if that's been released yet or not, but hoping he's back because he is so important to this team. Josh Jefferson is also back, as is Milan Momcilovic. Nate Heisey also back, and then they bring in Blake Buchanan to man the middle there. Depth is kind of my concern. The rest of the roster doesn't look too fantastic outside of this. They're already dealing with injuries. I think they're kind of one injury away from struggling. If Momcilovic or Jefferson or Lipsey, gets hurt in the season, I'm a little concerned about who they bring in, who really does the scoring. Defensively, they're going to be fantastic. Otzelberger is a great defensive coach. Last year, they weren't as good defensively as they were offensively, which was shocking. But I think they're going to have more than enough pieces to be great defensively. However, maybe one injury away from being terrific offensively. So, or from being not terrific offensively, I guess. So, splitting hairs there, but I think this team's going to be, probably in the conversation for a protected top 16 seed yet again. Staying in the Big 12, let's talk about Kansas. Kansas, the perk, Darren Peterson. My goodness, that game against Louisville, he was like this was like, where were you at moment of like watching this, just like, oh my goodness, this guy's going to be awesome. He's going to be fantastic. Do they have enough around him? That's the big concern. Flory Badunga, I have no doubt, is going to be good. I think one of these guys will step up and be great. I don't like Melvin Council Jr. I'm just going to come out and say it. I think he's probably going to be the second option for scoring behind Peterson. I just don't see it with him, quite frankly. Trey White, I like as a role player. Jaden Dawson's going to have to step up and really become, a really good Big 12 scorer, in my opinion. Elmarco Jackson, who knows what we're going to get from him. And Cole Rosario has gotten a lot of hype as a tremendous shooter. Kind of struggled in the exhibition game, but I can, you can see it there. I think he's going to be good. So will Darren Peterson have enough around him? This isn't a controversial take. That's pretty much what everyone's saying about Kansas this upcoming season. And will Melvin Council, kind of adjust and fit in? Because he's got a ton of talent. Something about the eye test just doesn't pass it for me. He kind of forces up a lot of shots, gets off balance a lot, but I think they're going to be better than people think. I think that was kind of proven in the game against Louisville, where it's like, oh my God, Darren Peterson is that good. But, that's going to be hard to live up to that standard and keep it going. But he seems to have the juices for it. All right, next up is Illinois. I had Illinois in tier 2 and ended up moving them down to tier 3. I'm starting to cool on them just a hair. I think they're going to be really good. However, how will they guard anybody? That's my big concern. The offense, I think, is going to be awesome with Kylan Boswell, Tomislava Visic, Ben Hummerkaus, Andrej Stojakovic, Ty Rogers, Zvonimir Visic. Petrovic just got cleared to play this upcoming season. So that's a lot of guys who can score the basketball. Defensively, how are they going to guard anyone? I think, Stojakovic is going to have to make a big leap defensively. Kylan Boswell is a serviceable defender. We'll see what Ivisic can do on the shot blocking end. Hummerkaus, not a tremendous defender. We know Zvonimir Ivisic is not a good defender. We'll see what Petrovic can be, but defensively, a little bit of concern, but offensively, not concerned at all. They're going to score the basketball. I think they're going to be similar to what last year's team was. Let me take a look here. What they finished 14th in offense last year, 40th in defense. I think they're probably going to be more top 10 in offense this upcoming season, and probably right around the 40th in defense range yet again. But I think that's going to be a more consistent 40th in defense instead of some games, holding teams to 60 points and then other games giving up they give up 110 to Duke or something. So I know Duke was a great team, but yeah, that's kind of my concern about Illinois this upcoming season. Probably a lot of the same thing can be said for Alabama. Alabama is going to score the basketball as good as anyone in the country, just with the system, with Nate Oates being the coach, with LeBaron Philon being your point guard, tremendous scorer. He's going to be awesome this year. I'm so high on LeBaron Philon. That was one of my hot takes in our hot take segment. LeBaron Philon could be a first-team All-American. I am that high on this guy, just being in the Nate Oates system with him for a second year. I think he's going to be great. Aiden Holloway is going to knock down shots. Latrell Wrightsell, hopefully he, gets back to being healthy. Will play a big role. Houston Millett is going to, he didn't play much last year with an injury. He's going to have to, or did he redshirt? He might have redshirted, but he's going to have to step up into a bigger role. However, mine is just strictly rim protection and defense in general. They're going to give up a lot of points because they play so fast. There's going to be so many possessions, but manning the middle, it's probably going to be Aiden Sherrill, maybe Taylor Bowen. I'm not too optimistic about either of them guarding the rim. I think they're both serviceable players. However, as the main line of defense at the rim, a little bit of concern for me in that aspect. All right, next up is going to be Tennessee. So if you're a fan of these schools, Alabama, Tennessee, Illinois, Kansas, Iowa State, Gonzaga, don't think I'm ranking you low. This has you as top 15 team in the entire country. So I'm still very high on these teams, and I think they could get there, but I needed to have some separation for the tiers, So Tennessee, another team I was very high on. Now I'm slowly cooling a little bit. I think they're going to be I have no doubt that this team's going to be good. How great can they be in terms of winning a national championship? Jacoby Gillespie is going to be your guy. He's going to be, I think in contention to be an All-American. He really struggled in the game against Duke, but he's going to be good. It's going to rely a lot on Nate Ahmed. That's my concern, is we're putting a lot on his shoulders. Their big three is going to be Gillespie, Nate Ahmed, and Felix Okpara, in my opinion. Okpara is awesome down low, tremendous shot blocker. He is one of the more underrated defensive players and just players in the entire country in terms of impact. I think he's going to be great. Jalen Carey, Amari Abram, Cade Phillips, JP Estrella, Bishop Boswell will probably mix in the other minutes, but these three guys are the three main guys to know. Gillespie is going to score. He's also a tremendous passer. They're going to need another guy to really, really step up. Now, say Amari Abram, who I'm a little lower on than, maybe the average person, say he really steps up. That can also really help, but Nate Ahmed's probably going to be their go-to scorer, and that's a little bit concerning for me. I know the defense is going to be tremendous with Gillespie, with Okpara, with Jalen Carey, with Amari Abram and Phillips and Estrella. I know the defense is going to be terrific, as it always is under Rick Barnes. Will they have enough scoring? They found diamonds in the rough with Dalton Connect and with Chaz Lanier. Can Nate Ahmed be that? That's a lot to ask a young freshman. All right, let's move on to tier 4. There is a world. So these are teams where it's I don't think they're going to win the national championship, but they could. You never know. Maybe everything falls into place. There's a lot of injuries, and we saw UConn as a 4 seed a couple years ago end up winning the national championship, and they were unranked in the preseason AP poll. So let's start with San Diego State. San Diego State's big thing is going to be continuity. Their continuity is fantastic for this upcoming season. Miles Bird, Reese Waters, Magoon Guath, BJ Davis, all back from last year's team. However, just overall talent is going to be the main concern coming out of, sort of a mid-major. San Diego State's not really a mid-major, but the talent level is going to be a little lower than those of, the Kentuckys and the Dukes of the world. But the continuity piece is absolutely awesome. Miles Bird and Magoon Guath could be pros, and I think will be pros. Reese Waters sat out the entire season last year with an injury. Did he miss the entire season or play a couple games? I can't quite remember. Let me take a quick look here because I'm curious. Yeah, he sat out the entire season last year. And then BJ Davis, as we also mentioned, they bring in Miles Heide. Miles Heide is back for another season. He was back. Who am I? I'm thinking of Cam Heide. Miles Heide back for another season as well. He might play a little bit of a role here, but just overall talent, we'll see how they can compete. I have no doubt this team's going to win the Mountain West. That was one on our best bet show. San Diego State to win the Mountain West plus like 170. Yeah, take it. They're the best team in the Mountain West. Utah State's going to be good. Boise State's going to be good. Even UNLV and Grand Canyon should be good, but it's San Diego State's conference this year, in my opinion, with Guath, with Bird, and Waters stepping back in. People forget how good he is, but just overall talent. We'll see how they match up against some of these top teams. Next up is Baylor. Baylor, just a bit of an unknown. I trust Scott Drew. They have 0 returning pieces from last year's team. However, I have heard tremendous things about Cam Carr, the transfer from Tennessee, who actually like quit the team last year, which is weird, and wouldn't think Scott Drew would go after someone like that, but supposedly he's been fantastic. They bring in a lot of notable names. Dan Skillings was in their conference at Cincinnati. He can score the ball. Obi Agbim transfers in from Wyoming, who can also score the ball, but at the mid-major level. Michael Ratai as well from Oregon State, the mid-major level. Bring in Tunde Yesufu, who's their 5-star freshman, who's supposed to be also awesome. What I'm getting at, Juslan Bodo should also probably be manning the middle. JJ White also transfers in from Omaha, so he's transferring up a level. A lot of mid-major guys, which is what I'm a little bit concerned about, and just obviously continuity with having 0 returning players. However, the talent is there. They have a lot of talent on this roster. Scott Drew put together, if he can be a genius and fit it all together, and you're looking at like a top 10 offense in the sport and top 50 defense in the sport, who's saying they can't, be a 5 seed and make a deep run in March Madness? They are also, what are they ranked at KenPom in the starting of the rankings? I believe they're 17th. Let me double check. Yes, they are 17th in KenPom's preseason rankings this upcoming season. So the computers are in on them. I can see a world where this team is better than people think. Another team that's kind of been skyrocketing up my list right now is Missouri. I underrated them at the start of the season. I think this is a top 25 team right now, in my opinion, going into the season. Anthony Robinson and Mark Mitchell are going to be the guys. Sebastian Mack transfers in from UCLA to kind of be the point guard of this operation. They're losing Caleb Grill, which was a tremendous shooting piece, which could really spread out the floor last year and allow Mark Mitchell and Anthony Robinson to draw fouls. This is going to be one of the worst basketball teams to watch based on if you hate fouls, because this team is going to draw so many fouls. However, it's kind of become a little bit of a Dennis Gates, just what's the word I'm looking for? Dennis Gates thing where repetition or whatever, where he gets fast athletic teams. Big, fast, athletic teams. They look like guys. They're like, they're off the bus all-stars, as we call them. When they get off the bus, you're like, whew, that's a team that you look like you don't want to mess with. There's a toughness. There's a quickness. I think this team could be that. I watched their preseason game against Kansas State, and you're just like, my God, these guys are fast. My God, these guys are big. This is not someone I'd want to guard. So that's kind of what I'm just buying into on this Missouri team. However, they're not as talented as some of the other, top dogs in the SEC. They obviously probably don't have as much money as the Kentuckys and Floridas of the world, but I think this could go really well for Missouri this upcoming season. I wouldn't be surprised if they're a top 6 seed for the second straight year under Dennis Gates. All right, next up is Oregon, a team I'm kind of cooling off on a little bit more, but there is a world because they do have a legitimate big 3 with Jackson Shelstad, with Nate Biddle, with KJ Evans. Jackson Shelstad is hurt right now. It looks like it's going to be close whether he makes the Players Era Festival, which is around Thanksgiving time. I could see a world where this team really falls off this year. I will say that. However, I can also see a world where they're really serviceable and hops into the top 15 of the AP poll at one point. TK Simpkins transfers in from Elon to also probably be in the starting lineup. They also bring in Sean Stewart from Ohio State, Ibrahima Traore, Devin Pryor, and Jamari Phillips should probably round out the rotation is kind of what I'm thinking. But their big 3, Shelstad, Biddle, and Evans. With Shelstad being hurt, I'm curious to see how far Nate Biddle can carry him. Going in, here's going to be a little bit of a hot take. I think Nate Biddle is a little bit overrated. I think he's really good. Don't get me wrong. I think he's really good, but I don't see him as like a all-American caliber player in a team that can really carry this team to a, with that, if Shellstad was out for the entire season, I'd probably be predicting this team to miss the tournament, as crazy as that sounds. So it's kind of how important it is. But however, I can also see a world where it's like these three just have the continuity and KJ Evans makes a big jump. Shellstad's awesome. Biddle's good. And they make a big jump for this upcoming season. But can also see a world where the bottom falls out. All right, next up is Wisconsin. I like this Wisconsin team a lot. Wanted to put them in tier 3, couldn't quite get there with the Alabamas and the Tennessees, but I am in on this Wisconsin team this upcoming season. Most notably, John Blackwell will be the guy to know. He's going to lead the team in scoring. Nolan Winter is also back. They bring in Nick Boyd. They bring in Andrew Rohde. They bring in Austin Rapp to round out what is expected to be the starting 5. To me, this team has a little bit of everything. They have shooting. They have a go-to guy. They have a solid piece at center with Nolan Winter. A little bit worried about how he's going to do without Steven Crowell also being there. However, the depth looks concerning to me. I don't know outside of the top 5 who's really going to give them key minutes. Jack Janicki? I don't know. So the depth's a little bit concerning for me. Might be another team that's one injury away. However, I trust Greg Gard. I trust the system. I trust John Blackwell. I like the starting 5. They got a little bit of everything. This is a team where I think if everything goes right, they're underrated every year. Will they be underrated again this year? We will see. All right, next up is Michigan State. I would define this Michigan State team as just like a watered down version of last year's team. I don't know if that's disrespectful or like a good thing because they were great last year. They won the Big Ten by 3 games last year. Michigan State team was awesome. They won 30 games, made the Elite 8. The defense is going to be awesome. I'm not concerned about it whatsoever. Jeremy Fierce, Cohen Carr, Kohler, Carson Cooper, Kurt Tang, Trey Fort. They're going to be fantastic defensively. Top 10, top 5, maybe. It's the offense that I'm very concerned about. How are they going to score? They had a NBA caliber guard last year in Jace Richardson. Jaden Akins is also gone, as is Trey Holloman. That's a lot of scoring. You're going to rely on Jackson Kohler a lot. Kurt Tang and Trey Fort are going to have to really step up and be key pieces at the 2 this upcoming season. So you're relying a lot on them. But however, if this is like a top 4 defense in the country and they're like top 50 in offense, there's a world where they get a good draw in March Madness and get a little bit of luck on their side and make a run towards the national championship game. I mean, I'm not betting it. Obviously, I have them in tier 4, but there's a world. Not knocking it out of the equation. Next up, it's going to be very similar yet opposite for Creighton. I have no worries that this team is going to score the basketball. I think they're going to be one of the better teams in the country on offense. Josh Dix, Owen Freeman, Jackson McAndrew, Isaac Trout, Fedor Zugic, Jason Green's back, Nick Graves. I think this team's going to be fantastic on offense. Josh Dix could be a borderline All-American player. Owen Freeman's got to get healthy. He's a tremendous piece as well. However, they were on Iowa last year, who scored the basketball, don't really guard all that well. I'm not too optimistic about Jackson McAndrew guarding as well. Jason Green can be serviceable, and we'll see if Fedor Zugic can make a jump this upcoming season. I think they're going to be tremendous offensively. Could they get there defensively? Just like we said with Michigan State, if this is a team that's a top 10 offense in the country, can they get to 50th in defense, top 40 in defense? I don't know if they can get there, but if they do, there's a world where this team is, a 3 seed like they were a couple years ago and can make a deep run. All right, next up, who would have thought? Who would have thought we would be saying this? North Carolina State. How about the job Will Wade has done, and how about the job that Will Wade is about to do this upcoming season? I think this is a top 25 team in the country. Obviously, I would have them ranked there. Now, just because I have some of these teams on here doesn't mean I think they're better than other teams. However, these teams I see if some teams that aren't on here, I don't necessarily think these teams are better going into the season. However, I think if everything works out, I didn't want to leave them off as a team that could make a deep run in the NCAA tournament. Like this team, Darian Williams, we've talked about, he's awesome. I wish he stayed at Texas Tech, but I also am kind of excited to see how he does for Will Wade this upcoming season. Trey Holloman, transfer from Michigan State. Terrence Arsenault, transfer from Houston. That's a lot of winning. That is Darian Williams from Texas Tech, Elite 8. Trey Holloman, Michigan State, Elite 8. Terrence Arsenault, Houston, national championship game. Van Allen Lubin, North Carolina, not very good, but needless to say, Van Allen Lubin is going to be much better this year, I believe, for this NC State team. He's he's a high recruit. He's going to be good. I think he's going to fit in this system a little bit better than Hubert Davis is. He also brings in Quadir Copeland with him from McNeese, who I think is going to play a big role. Paul McNeil Jr. is the other guy who's kind of getting a lot of hype this offseason as a guy who could be an elite scorer. Matthew Abel also there as well. Jerry Dang. So I like the depth. I like the team put together. However, the big concern is obviously going to be continuity in just year one, just putting it all together for Will Wade at NC State. All right, let's stick in the state and go to North Carolina because North Carolina has a talented roster. It might not equate to a $14 million roster as they're reported to have, but it is a lot of talent. Caleb Wilson is one of the other freshmen who's like this year of freshman is going to be awesome. This is going to be a memorable year for freshmen, in my opinion. Caleb Wilson's going to be terrific. I love Seth Trimble. I have loved Seth Trimble since a couple years ago when they were that 1 seed. And I think he is so underrated. I think he's going to be fantastic this upcoming season. Jonathan Powell also transfers in. Henry Visar transfers in from Arizona. Kion Evans transfers in from Colorado State. So Jaron Stevenson also transfers in from Alabama. I'm not huge on the Jaron Stevenson ad. I think he kind of is what he is. We see the upside as a 7-footer who can shoot, but just not aggressive enough for me, in my opinion. Kion Evans, Henry Visar, Jonathan Powell, Seth Trimble, Caleb Wilson should be your starting lineup, in my opinion. It's a good starting lineup. It's a really good starting lineup. And as sad as it is to say, I'm concerned about Hubert Davis. What will he do? Will he thrive in this year where he is, the face of the hot seat this upcoming season? Will he thrive in that scenario? It's been every other year. He was a 1 seed 2 years ago, was an 11 seed last year, and didn't even really deserve that. So this team's got talent. Will it all come together? I think they're going to be better than they were last year. If you had to make me bet on a seed that they are, I would say it's a 6 seed with a ton of talent and a team that a 3 seed wouldn't want to play in the round of 32. All right, finally, we're going to talk about Auburn because Auburn's got talent, but this is a team I'm going to be fading this upcoming season. Now, Auburn fans, don't hate me because you were my pick all year last year to win the national championship. I loved Auburn all season last year once they got in that fight on the plane and then, that whole scenario. And then you go to Houston and beat Houston, who was my preseason pick to win it all. I'm like, no matter what happens, I'm picking this team all the way. Had a good run, made the Final Four, just ran into a juggernaut of Florida. They have talent. Keyshawn Hall and Tahad Pettiford could be, one of the terrific, duos in all of college basketball this upcoming season. Keyshawn Murphy transfers in from Mississippi State. Good role player, has never really been put into a big role, though. So we'll see what he can do. Kevin Overton transfers in from Texas Tech, was also previously at Drake. He's going to have to be a real defensive presence, which I'm a little bit worried about. Abdul Bashir transfers in from, where was he at last year? I believe he was at Arizona State last year. I know he's a transfer in from somewhere, but I can't find it. But Abdul Bashir is also in there. So what will this team be without, all the pieces that they had last year? Tahad Pettiford is going to have to jump up and be a elite player in the SEC. He was already an elite player, but he's going to be the guy this year. Keyshawn Hall is going from a UCF team that, wasn't all too spectacular to the SEC, where you're a top brand in the SEC. So they have the talent to do it. However, it's year one for a coach. It's going to be tough. They're playing a gauntlet of a non-conference schedule. It's going to be tough, but Auburn should be serviceable this upcoming season. I can see a world where, they start off slow and then really get hot and become like a popular pick to make a deep run. All right, that's going to do it for our tiers. Now let's just talk about this real quick. Let's talk about national championship odds via FanDuel Sportsbook. Purdue's your favorite at plus 900. So a lot of the teams we just talked about. Houston is next at plus 1,000. Duke at plus 1,100. UConn at plus 1,400. That's my favorite bet. Hopefully you got in on it earlier. I had UConn. I found him at plus 1,700, I think it was, on one of the previous shows. So hopefully you hopped on that because I think this team's going to be great. Kentucky at plus 1,600. Florida at plus 1,700. Michigan at plus 1,900. As is Illinois at plus 1,900. Two teams I'm kind of moving off of a little bit. I got Illinois to win the Big Ten at plus 1,200. How about that? How quickly they have rised up, thankfully, for being ranked number 6 in KenPom's preseason rankings. St. John's also plus 1,900. Texas Tech, Louisville, and BYU are all plus 2,000. Kansas is plus 2,200. UCLA plus 2,500. And then Tennessee and Alabama at plus 3,000. Speaking of betting, I don't really like to. This is more of a me thing. I don't do a ton of individual game betting content because I'm a little uncomfortable with people betting on my picks, quite frankly, because betting comes and goes. You get hot, you get low. It's a year-long thing. So people that just tune in once and want to, make a quick profit, some days are going to be some losing days. However, I do think I'm going to probably lean into doing a betting show this upcoming season. So that's just kind of a question. Hopefully you made it this long, an hour and 4 minutes into the episode. I know I'm just yapping on here, but I want to do a betting show because of the 1,000 subscriber thing and just kind of give some more people content that they want instead of just me being kind of a sissy and not really wanting to do all the betting content just because I don't like people. You're a new subscriber, you watch the show once and you're like, yeah, oh, he went 2-3 today. Like, yeah, but it over the year, it will be positive. Like, don't get me wrong. Like it's going to be positive just with, following the sport. But yeah, that's why I'm just a little bit more uncomfortable about it and why I've done a lot more future bets because they're, low risk, high reward. You're not betting on every single game. You're just betting one thing. So, we did some betting content in March Madness season last year that a lot of people like. So I'm open to doing it if people would like it because, it is something that like I follow. I do follow the lines and, all the Ken Pom lines and everything and do research on the matchups and stuff. So it is something I'm into, but I will probably just do like a disclaimer every show where it's like, look, if you're here to just for one time, I wouldn't recommend doing it. Now we might be positive, but we might also be negative for one day, but it's an overall process thing. So let me know if that's something you guys would be interested in some some betting shows. I'm thinking of probably doing the season starts in by the time you hear this 4 days. I wasn't planning on doing the show, but 1,000 subscribers had to. Wanted to do one more show before the start of the season. So I'm going to record probably Sunday night and it'll be open on, or it'll be out on Monday morning. I'm probably going to do the standard I've done is record on Mondays, release it around noon for the weekday games and reviewing the weekend games. And then once it hits Friday, I record on Friday, usually release it around noon where I preview the weekend games and then review the weekday games. So I think I might just add a segment at the end if people are interested in just betting, best bets. We always do all the betting lines and I give, kind of just some brief insight, but now I think I might do like a best bets thing at the end of every show. So not even just with some of the games to watch, with some of the, off topic games, the low major, mid major games that not all people are buying into, but it is good to make some money, So let me know if that's something people would be interested in. Again, thanks to everyone for the 1,000 subscribers. We're about an hour and 7 minutes into this, so thanks to everyone who stuck with us the rest of this whole episode. So we'll be back once again. It'll release Monday morning, previewing Monday and Tuesday games. We're going to be a little bit skewed to start the season because we want to get as much content out as possible early in the season. So we'll record Sunday night for Monday and Tuesday games, and then we'll record Wednesday for the rest of the weekend games, and then we'll go back to Mondays and Fridays with some best bets in there. So stay tuned, hit that like and subscribe button before heading out so you don't miss any of that. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Bracket Science with 2 S's, so you are familiar with what we're doing every day. But we link everything between our YouTube and Instagram, TikTok. So go check that out. We'll talk to you again in a couple days here. Till then, take care.